So thank you, Daniel, Professor Martinez, and for all the panelists earlier today. And we'll just want to take really just a few minutes to, I guess, move from the ground and a little bit more up into the stratosphere, but just to welcome on this special day and in this special year someone who doesn't really need an introduction, but I think deserves particular recognition today. And just to hear for a few minutes from him about some important kind of historical and I think contextual ideas and experiences that relate to CMS and the International Migration Review. He's a force of compassion, imagination, and hope in the world of migration, a man who from very early in his years could see with an anthropologist's eye and discern with a sociologist's mind and feel with the heart of prayer and the love of creation. Silvano Cardinal Tomasi joins us today and really this week to celebrate the accomplishments of the Center for Migration Studies and the International Migration Review, both of which were brought into the world 60 years ago. So just a few words about Cardinal Tomasi. He was ordained a priest of the Congregation of the Missionaries of St. Charles, Scalabrini, in the 1960s and came to the United States from Italy, himself an immigrant. He earned his PhD in sociology from Fordham University, and from 1970 to 1974 was assistant professor of sociology at the City University of New York and the New School for Social Research. In 1964, that's the big year, he co-founded with his brother, Lidio, the Center for Migration Studies, and founded and then for many years edited the journal International Migration Review. A few other pieces that I have to add, because I think they really reveal Cardinal Tomasi's spirit and passion. From 1983 to 1987, he was director of the then newly created Office for the Pastoral Care of Migrants and Refugees of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. In 1989, Pope John Paul II appointed him as Secretary of the Pontifical Council for the Pastoral Care of Migrants. In 1996, the Cardinal was named titular Archbishop of Cercina, appointed as an Apostolic Nuncio to Eritrea and Ethiopia, and as Apostolic Delegate to Djibouti. Later in 2003, he was appointed as Permanent Observer of the Holy See to the United Nations in Geneva, and in November of 2020, Pope Francis elevated him as Cardinal Deacon. So welcome, Cardinal Tomasi. It's a pleasure to have you, and congratulations on an extraordinary career and life of service and ministry. And thank you especially for joining us today and tonight on this important occasion to share with us briefly some of your recollections and reflections on the Center for Migration Studies, each of which, with the International Migration Review, played and continue to play an important role in the public, intellectual, policy, and ministry spaces of migration. So to begin, really just have 3, maybe 4 questions. And if the volume needs to be raised, please do so, Jaden, we'll see. But the simple first question is, why did you and your brother Lidio, both very young men, and I happen to have the pleasure of interviewing Father Cardinal Tomasi in Rome in July, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds, why did you decide to start the Center for Migration Studies?
It's a small beginning. Let's begin with this statement. I was a student here in New York, and the group I belong to is a group of people dedicated to the assistance of migrants and refugees. One of the issues that was emerging in the early 1960s was the fact that migration was not in the mainstream of the academic life, and it was not part of the popular attention. So there was a need to circulate information about what was happening in the field of migration, and the group of students with whom I was living were concerned and started a digest of articles and books that dealt with the topic of migration. And this lasted for about a year. Then I was ordained a priest in New York, and a long time ago. And the main concern was to continue that attention to migration, to the group of migrants. And to focus particularly on the adjustment process of migrants and the need to help them in the difficulties that they were facing. I was asked by this religious community called the Scalabrini to study sociology and to start a center as a backup support of this effort, a center for migration studies. I said that I was ready to go and take courses in sociology. And then from there, things developed. I met in my school years a man who was great in studying and sensitizing public opinion about migrants, Father Joseph Fitzpatrick, who was a professor at Fordham, professor of sociology. He came from Harvard, where he had done his studies and written his doctoral dissertation. And he kind of took me under his wing and helped me to understand the situation. And he wrote to the sign of support an article for the first issue of the International Migration Review, because I felt that if I had to work in this area of migration, rather than reporting what other people were saying, to have original articles and clear positions on the different debates concerning migration. And so that's how the first issue of Migration to the International Migration Review was shaped up. It was not easy to envision an answer that was appropriate to the situation. So I didn't know I was an immigrant myself. I had come from Italy, and I decided to go and visit the big names in the field. So I took some time out and I went to meet people at the University of Pennsylvania, the University of Columbia, up in Massachusetts, the MIT. And I discovered that two things were obvious. Demography was considered the area appropriate for the study of birth and death and the impact they had in society. But migration was not part of the deal. Then I asked the professor that I met, like Everett Lee. Some of you might remember Everett Lee, who wrote on the law of migration and became an original advisory board, an academic advisory board to the International Migration Review. I wasn't well prepared in the field, so I felt the need of having experts who had experience in university structures to help out, and they did. There was a good group of very competent and very well esteemed people like Eisenstadt in Israel. It was an international group. And with the advice of this group, things began to take shape. And the magazine grew and was accepted as a serious effort in the understanding and of the process of migration related to the survival of people, but also to the persistence, the activity with the group, the relationship between the different groups that came to the States, how they related to each other, not just to the wider society, but among themselves, to learn to function with differences in a creative way. The magazine took some time to make itself known, but slowly the subscriptions began to increase because the question of money was very important to get things done. And I had to find a way to support the production of a quarterly magazine. They costed some money to print. And there were some groups like the American Committee on Italian Migration or the Conference of Bishops in Washington, Department of Migration and Refugees, that gave some help.
And if I can, sort of to pick up and maybe ask you a sort of second question, and in the birth of CMS and the birth of IMR, difficult and challenging. Funding, of course, is always a challenge, but it's become something extraordinary. Both institutions and who play a role today. And I guess I would ask, sort of as a follow-up and perhaps final question, you talked about sensitizing public opinion. You talked about how to envision an answer to the situation. Today, and I literally mean, I think actually today, there's a lot of anxiety about what might become of the rule of law, of the respective institutions or history, and certainly a concern for the common good. And migration, and most particularly, the vision of the migrant, not just migration, but the migrant as person in the popular imagination today has been seriously degraded over decades of scapegoating. And this is true in the United States, it's true in Europe. So bringing the same conviction of you as a young man and the wisdom of your time in this field, can you give us some words of comfort and hope about what do we do? What does CMS continue to do? What is the way forward, and what do you envision as that line of hope? A really small question, by the way.
Migration is a major factor even today. And if you follow the Trump comments during the campaign, you know that migration disturbs somehow some people, concern others. And this is a reality that continues, that persists. And in Europe as well as in the States, there is the need of migrants. Germany runs its economy and it needs manpower that comes from outside. Italy that sent 30 million people to different parts of the world as immigrants has now 5 million immigrants in itself. The question of migration has to be placed, in my opinion, in a larger context, in the relationship between countries and the fact that in the end it's a question of justice. There is a need to appreciate the fact that people move and normally they are pushed to move, and they have is a cause of their necessity to emigrate, some violation of their rights, yes, the right to have a decent living in their own country, or violence that forces them to move. I was reading today in the New York Times an article on Haiti, to give an example. Haitians are moving to the States, they are trying to go to Canada, and the reason is the terrible violence that makes life impossible. So we need to keep the perspective of the defense and the respect of the human person. They need to be protected in whatever circumstances it may be. And therefore, when it's not possible for the people to be protected in their own country, there is a certain claim to go to another place. It's not possible to receive all the problems of the world in one country or another. But what is necessary to do is to keep this perspective in sight. And the study of migration is an academic important area of knowledge, but it is not the end in itself. The end in it comes as a protection of human beings that need to be respected, to have a way of surviving that is acceptable. The values that are on the basis of the study of migration are the basic human rights that even the United Nations acknowledge and try to implement by indicating the areas that need pursued to be on where to work on, the target goals of development, and this is a challenge for all of us.
Thank you. It is a challenge. I thank you very much. And I know, though, that also we are inspired and continue to follow your inspiration. This is a challenging moment, but it is a moment also that also calls on us to have an imagination of justice and hope, which you have led with by example for a very long time. And so we're very grateful to you, grateful to your brother, and very grateful for you coming today. Thank you very, very much for your long work on this.